Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans of WECT and Fox Wilmington News, and this is Backstory. No matter where you are, we've all had sunshine. We just marked Sunshine Week across this country. That's a coordinated way to bring attention to the need for and the benefits of open government and the freedom of information in the United States. The media is a leader in the effort, but we're certainly not the only group that has an interest in the public's right to know. Journalists must be aware of the sunshine laws where they work. Those laws govern which meetings are open to the public and therefore open to the media. They govern when a public body can meet behind closed doors and the process that board must follow for that to happen. They also govern what documents are public, and that's essential for reporters to be the watchdogs that the public needs us to be. WECT and Fox Wilmington, well, we've requested, received, and then used public documents to track how elected leaders spend your taxpayer dollars. We want to know if those senators, representatives, council members, and commissioners that you put in office are following proper protocol with your money. In a moment, a discussion with two of the leaders of that effort inside our newsroom. But first, one of the early reports filed under the banner of WECT Investigates Following Your Money. Ann McAdams with this story in March of 2013.
New Hanover County Commissioner Jonathan Barfield travels to conferences all over the country. He often expenses his meals, his transportation costs, and his rooms at high-end hotels to county taxpayers. Barfield says that's a financial necessity.
And when I leave town, I'm a realtor. If I don't sell a home, I don't get a paycheck.
Here in town, Barfield is a regular at charity events and galas, and the county sometimes covers his cost of admission. Barfield says these events benefit the public he serves, and he could not afford to go if he had to pay for them all out of his own pocket. County Manager Chris Coudray says he supports the county picking up the tab.
If they're attending as a representative of the county, then it is appropriate for the county to help bear the cost of that attendance.
Barfield says when he was elected in 2008, the county often paid for commissioners' tickets to charity events. But the board has since become more conservative, and Barfield is now the only one charging the events to the county. Two other commissioners had some expenses covered by the county last year. Beth Dawson's charges totaled $1,600, including things like conference fees and mileage reimbursement. Tom Wolf had $4,800 in charges, much of it on hotel rooms at conferences. Commissioner Brian Berger spent much of the last year in jail and did not get any reimbursements. Jonathan Barfield spent the most. His expenses added up to $10,600, almost half of the county's $22,000 total travel budget for all 5 commissioners. His charges range from $6 lunches at Chick-fil-A to $1,000 charges at the Hilton. County residents have also paid for Barfield to play golf, but after we asked about those charges, Barfield reimbursed the county for his golf games. Notably, Barfield is the only commissioner with a county-issued charge card.
I'm just not independently wealthy, so therefore it's more convenient for me to not be reimbursed, but to go ahead and have the county pay for it. They're going to pay for it whether I'm reimbursed or not.
Barfield says he's the most active county commissioner, and that's why his expenses are higher. He attends dozens and dozens of meetings, events, and conferences each year, and taxpayers are often covering the cost. He stands by his jam-packed calendar, saying his activism helps the county. It's also helped him get appointed to state and national committees.
You have to have leaders, elected officials, that are willing to make the investment to go get the information so they can bring that information back and make our community better.
But now Barfield is looking for a larger platform in which to lead. He's running for Congress. The vehicle he's driving to many of these county events has his congressional campaign magnets on the side, and his campaign recently tweeted out a picture of Barfield and Michael Jordan taken at a county commissioners conference in Asheville this summer. Local taxpayers paid for Barfield to be there, and he used the picture to promote his campaign.
For people who are wondering, are you overutilizing this to help your national campaign, what would you say to them?
No. That's not who I am. That's not who I've ever been. I mean, it's really it's a lot of work involved for not a whole lot of resources. But again, I don't do this for money. I do this because I love and have a passion for public service.
So joining me here today, WECT Fox Wilmington Assistant News Director Justin West.
Hello.
And WECT investigative reporter Ann McAdams. Full disclosure, I worked with Ann at a television station before we both came to work at WECT and Fox Wilmington. So, and you had done investigative stories over there first, and so you've been in this kind of genre of reporting for quite a while. What is it that draws you to this kind of looking into records, seeing what taxpayer money's been spent on?
I was actually a business major in college, and so I kind of have a mind for numbers and like looking through Excel spreadsheets and other things that probably don't appeal to a lot of other people. But so I like the numbers, but also I think this affects a lot of people. It's taxpayer money, and when you're paying that tax bill every year, it's usually pretty high, and you want to make sure that your money's being spent well. So I think it's important to see how our money's being spent, and it's also important for somebody to be looking, because this stuff isn't the most interesting a lot of times, to pile through all these documents. And if we don't look, there's no guarantee anybody else is going to. So I think it's important from a watchdog perspective that somebody's looking out for the taxpayers.
And I think, Justin, knowing you like I do, that's been your kind of mantra about the media for a long time, is keeping an eye on those who get our tax dollars and then spend our tax dollars, right?
Yes, it may sound cliche, but I do take the whole watchdog thing seriously. A lot of the issues that come up in county commissioner meetings, city council meetings aren't always exciting for the general public, but I think spending of taxpayer money is something that anyone can get behind. Everyone works hard for their money. They expect the same kind of frugal spending as they do on their own.
And so the whole following your money, really how all of this started, which kind of morphed into a following your money kind of series of investigative reports, was just kind of a blanket freedom of information request that you started, right, Justin?
Yeah, I think we have our investigative meetings, and one thing we really wanted to look at was spending. So we chose every county agency, city agency, community college, and just sent a simple blanket request of, I think it was either a year's worth of data or 6 month worth of data on money spent on credit cards, purchasing cards, travel, and then just took the next few weeks and started going through all of those hundreds of pages of documents that we got back.
The first report that I found, I think, was in March of 2013, is breaking down the expenses of county commissioners. And obviously, we had to get that report in sooner than that. But when you look through this first batch of documents, do you remember the first thing that stuck out of your mind?
Well, honestly, I didn't know when I went back to the investigative meetings, what y'all would find to be interesting. I just started, highlighting florist charges or meals out or hotel room charges or anything that people might find questionable or not necessarily necessary. People might question the necessity of it. So I just highlighted everything. But yeah, there are things that you find interesting. This is actually a more recent finding, but when we were going over the commissioners, New Hanover County Commissioner's trip to Pinehurst, we found that they paid gratuity twice. There was automatically gratuity included, and I guess they didn't notice that and paid an additional gratuity each time. And it just kind of begs the question, if it had been your money, would you have noticed that? Because a lot of people are careful with their own money. And when somebody else is picking up the tab, maybe you're a little looser or you don't notice things quite as much as you would if it was your own cash.
So 2013, the first document I have that I can remember anyway, was breaking down the expenses, and we found that some commissioners were charging more for the county than others. At that time, I think we had to, and refresh my memory, Justin, we had to kind of look at what the policies were for who was submitting, and we learned along the way what the county and the city and the colleges, what they allowed and what they didn't allow. So we were learning along the way as well, right? Correct.
I think every entity had a little different spending policy. Some didn't have spending policies. Excuse me. That's changed in the time being.
So we find out that there are some in the article that I dug up here. Jonathan Barfield charged more for the county. Woody White didn't charge any. What do you think was one of the first reactions to when we first started asking these questions? And when you would start making these phone calls that, hey, I found out I got these expenses, were they ready for those first questions when we started asking them?
I think there was some defensiveness there. For example, we found out Jonathan Barfield over the last fiscal year, I think spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 on travel expenses, where Woody White spent none, and then some others spent, a couple $1,000s. But there was a pretty big disparity there about how much they were spending. I would say defensive, that we were questioning this, and just Barfield specifically wanting us to make sure I'm doing this for the county business. When I do this, I'm taking time away from my own business, and so it's proper that the county pick up my expenses. So I would say they wanted to explain why, but a bit defensive.
Justin?
But just to add on that, I do understand the argument that some have made about, when I go on these conferences, I'm learning things that I can bring back. But some of the other charges we did find, specifically with Chairman Barfield, was tickets to events such as nonprofit events, basically where the buy-in tickets were $50, $150 sometimes. And those are the ones that we really questioned in those original reports back in 2013 was, what value is the county getting out of a $150 ticket to some sort of fundraising luncheon? There were other county commissioners at the time who were going to those same events, and they said they didn't feel it was proper for the county taxpayers to have to pick that up. So you had some groups of commissioners going, and Chairman Barfield was the only one that was actually expensing those tickets.
And there were others who then, Ted Davis at the point charged the county for three events. Brian Berger, Rick Catlin charged $35. So we saw a real true disparity of more than $8,000 down to only $35. So as you called around, did you get different responses from the different commissioners as well?
I would say, like with Woody White, for example, he, especially in the beginning, was reluctant to express any concern about Barfield's expenses, for example. These folks sit together on the same board, and they don't want to point their fingers necessarily, especially at first. So he just said, it's up to each commissioner to decide what they feel is proper, and then they have to report to the voters when election day comes around. Since that time, a lot has happened, and Woody White has been more specifically calling out Barfield's expenditures as improper. But in the beginning, he just said, it's up to each commissioner to make their own judgment call.
When we started looking even at the city of Wilmington, do you remember what if anything we seemed to find?
Yeah, the city of Wilmington is interesting. They had a situation, I think it was back in 2008, when they took a trip to Washington, D.C. and had their own meal at Ruth's Chris that was quite expensive. Spouse members of council members were included in the bill. Alcohol was purchased, if I remember correctly. Anyway, after that happened, they revised their spending policy. And how they do it now is they get a per diem when they travel. They get a blanket amount of money for each day they're gone, and how they spend it is up to them. They don't even have to turn in receipts. But there's a cap on how much they can spend, and I think that cap is widely believed to be a reasonable amount of money for how much it costs to eat when you're traveling, and then it's kind of up to them to do what they want to do.
One of the first, I believe, true differences that we made, and you can toss in more if I've jumped ahead too far, is that the county, New Hanover County, really didn't require itemized receipts, and then started really putting that policy into place and started requiring more as we did more of these investigative stories, correct?
Well, that's interesting because that first, New Hanover County was one of the first agencies that I went through all the documents, and what I was finding wasn't necessarily a violation of policy, as Justin was quick to point out. He said, well, they're not breaking any rules, and I said, should they take another look at this as maybe not the best way to give the public transparency about what they're buying, and to just kind of have some guidelines as to what's appropriate. If you don't have an itemized receipt, we don't know if you purchased alcohol, we don't know if you purchased lobster, or if you had 3 people on the bill, or just there's a reason for an itemized receipt. And so that was interesting because when we interviewed County Manager Chris Coudray, he pointed out in our interview, you're right, I'm glad you brought this to our attention. We need to take a look at this, and there's an obvious reason for itemized receipts. And my understanding is that's being added to the new travel policy, is that itemized receipts will be required for county staff members moving forward.
So even though some may, bristle at what we do, it's obvious that we have pointed out in at least this instance, and maybe some others, shortcomings in the system when it comes to being accountable for the way they spend money.
I think so. I mean, even though there's the defensive reaction, you see the change coming, and at least, with the county, it's yet to be seen how much it'll change, but they've at least changed it for the staff members, itemized receipts being required or whatever. So there's the defensive reaction, but there's also change. So that makes us feel a little bit validated in bringing up these concerns.
And also on the topic of change, while the New Hanover County Commissioners still aren't included in the actual travel policy, they recently went on a trip to DC, and they all stayed in with the per diem that's set in the county employee policy, even though they're under no obligation to do that. And I think that is a direct result of our stories with that.
It's having an impact already in how taxpayer money is being spent. Even if people who work 9 to 5 and they may not realize it until we point it out to them in reports afterwards, it is still having some kind of an impact with the people they elect to do their business.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch the feedback that we get from the viewers as these stories are coming out. Most of it has been very supportive of our coverage, and thank you for pointing this out. We're glad somebody's watching. But one thing that I thought was interesting is some people have written, I can barely afford McDonald's when I go out to eat, and I just don't appreciate when my money is being used extravagantly by my elected leaders. So I think it's important for the county elected leaders to hear that perspective from the people whose money they're using.
Right, and Justin, just for those of you listening, there is nobody in the newsroom who answers the phone more than Justin West, being the assignment manager and the assistant news director. So you get more of these phone calls, and you hear from the public probably more than anybody else in the newsroom. So give me a sense of some of the calls, some of the reaction that you have heard taken after maybe one of Ann's reports has been on the air.
Sure, I know it's probably not the most scientific way to gauge response to stories, but these series of spending stories have generated more response than almost any story we've ever done. And like Ann says, most of it's, I don't spend this when I go out. Or,
right.
At my job, we have a per diem as well. And if I tried to bring home a receipt that was twice the amount of our per diem, my boss would just laugh at me. People are thanking us for doing these kind of stories. And you will get the occasional, you guys are just nitpicking here. It's a multi-million-dollar budget. What does this $35, steak actually mean? But it does matter because,
sure.
It's the optics of it. It's, every dollar counts.
And if they're apt to do it with a meal, in many people's eyes, they may be more apt to do it with a contract, with anything else of a higher amount, or in governing the county, the city, the university, or whatever it is.
That's some of the concern that we've heard with CFCC's coverage. And just if you're willing to buy your wife a first-class plane ticket with public money, yeah, it's not a huge amount of money, but what are you doing on the bigger dollar amount decisions that you're having to do for the college with President Spring? There's an auditor's investigation going on right now to find that out. So yes, if you're loose with the little things, or you're loose with the big things. And
that's where I wanted to dovetail in, because in the last, I would say, 6 months, aside of doing a couple of stories on a county commissioner or city council level with spending, a lot of our coverage was on Cape Fear Community College. And this really started, if I'm not mistaken here, with furnishing Union Station and the budget for the Union Station project. Is that where that started, Justin?
Well, honestly, I think like I said earlier, this CFCC was just one of a dozen groups that we had sent the same public records request to. Mm-hmm. Went through all those, nothing was really standing out, and then Ann started just finding little details, such as a first-class plane ticket, dinners with alcohol, and from there, we started asking more questions about those, and then we would do a story. And I think the more and more you start looking, uncovering rocks, the more tips and news stories that come out of the woodwork. And this was a unique example of a story where we do one story, and then the next day we're getting either emails or phone calls saying, well, yeah, you looked at that, but what about this?
Right.
And that story just kept rolling down the hill.
People came out of the woodwork.
Our discussion continues with Ann McAdams and Justin West after we hear another of Ann's investigative reports from November of 2014.
In a single boardroom on the 5th floor of Union Station, there are at least $46,000 worth of leather chairs. The swivel chairs surrounding the custom-built conference table cost about $1,000 apiece, and the 40 side chairs for people in the audience each cost $654 before taxes or installation. CFCC tells us the furniture was selected by an architectural firm along with an interior designer based on input and a budget set by the college. While a quick Google search shows you can buy swivel and side chairs for a fraction of that cost, CFCC instructed the contractors to select executive-level furnishings similar to those at major educational institutions. That helps explain why college president Ted Spring's office cost over $46,000 to furnish. Furnishings in Dr. Spring's sizable office include a large desk, 6 leather chairs, a couch, a coffee table, 3 end tables, a round table, a credenza, 2 wall storage units, and 2 table lamps. The cost to furnish his personal conference room next door was an additional $20,000. Purchases like these have prompted a number of college employees to contact us with concerns about excessive and unnecessary spending, although they did not want us to use their names for fear of losing their jobs. But they tell us other, more essential expenses have been neglected while the administrative offices were elaborately furnished. President Spring declined an on-camera interview about the furniture, but we were given a tour of the 5th floor along with an official statement. In addition to the office areas, the 5th floor serves as a conference center to host events for a wide variety of community organizations. The income from rental fees helps offset the cost of operating the facility.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I remember when we would do one of those stories, we'd get one of those, I want to remain anonymous, but look into this. And how did that gauge what you looked at next? Did you take some of those tips and look into that next piece?
Definitely. I mean, people, we don't know what we're going to find. We asked for these, just a blanket, give us all the financials, and we went through it on our own. But people that are inside the building have a better perspective for what money is being spent on or how things are going down. So it was very helpful to us to have tipsters who were in the know calling us saying, you might want to look here, you might want to look here. And when we did, a lot of times we'd find something.
Mm-hmm. But that would also potentially, or take me through the process of, did you then need to file another request specifically for furnishing Union Station or talking to the people who did that project, right?
David Harden has been very nice throughout this whole thing. He is the public affairs person for
Right.
CFCC, and we have kept him very busy with all of the public requests that we've been putting in. And yes, every day it seemed something else would come to light and it would require a new public records request. So yeah.
What did you, along the way, was there a big one that started the whole Union Station project, or that series of reports, or was that you, Ann? Do you remember?
CFCC was one of the first organizations that we put in these big requests to. And after we started doing our coverage, that's when somebody brought to our attention, you might want to look at how much the furniture cost, or have you seen the furniture on the 5th floor of Union Station? It's exceptionally nice. Mm-hmm. So I just think it was kind of like an onion, and it just kind of kept, it was the story that kept on giving.
Right, and then you started getting travel requests and finding out about Mr. Spring and some of the other records.
Right, and like the mileage reimbursement.
Right.
That was not something we would have known about or not something we would have noticed necessarily by going over the initial financial documents, how much he was getting reimbursed for a vehicle that he wasn't paying for.
Another break from our conversation now to let you hear a report that Ann filed in early December of 2014 when she got Dr. Ted Spring to go on camera and asked him about those mileage reimbursements.
I think the policy, and I believe the policy needs to be reviewed, and I agree. Clearly it should be looked at, but we were following the policy, or the business office was following the policy.
Dr. Spring's situation is unique because he's not driving a state-owned vehicle or his personal vehicle. The Ford Fusion he's been driving is a courtesy car provided by Enterprise Rental Car as part of a sponsorship for the athletic department. So the college doesn't have a reimbursement rate in place that more closely aligns with his actual cost of driving the car, and they now say they plan to create one. We also found out for the first time today that Spring has been reimbursed for trips just a few blocks away from the college. Some of the trips are short. They're a mile, like round trip. And some people think that is
is it necessary to fill out a form to get reimbursed for a mile?
I'm not sure what's on the reimbursement form at all. I don't fill them out. They're just filled out. I mean, if I go someplace, I list down where I'm supposed to be going according to the calendar, and someone else fills in the actual mileage for me.
Do you, I mean, you are going...
And I don't believe I've ever been reimbursed for a mile.
Actually, like, many times for trips to, like, the City Club or trips to Thalian Hall.
Oh, for lunch.
Yeah, for lunch.
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
And that turned into action as well because they then revised that policy as well, correct?
Correct. And Spring said, I was not aware of the rate which I was being reimbursed. I think it was something like 56 cents a mile, which is the state's rate for how much they'll pay you to use your personal vehicle for business. But this vehicle was a rental vehicle provided to him for free by the college, and so we didn't understand why he was getting reimbursed when he wasn't really incurring an expense other than gas. But again, you had to have somebody on the inside who would know that to tell you, look here. And then we did, and then Spring said, you're right, we should look at this.
And to be fair as well, that wasn't the first time that Dr. Spring had reacted to one of our stories. After we did a story about the plane ticket for his wife, he reimbursed that. I believe he reimbursed $2,500 worth of either trips or meals, amongst other expenses. So that's just another example of us getting results from the story.
On the plane ticket for his wife, I should point out, I called it a first class seat originally. I was told it was a choice seating seat. I don't really know what that means. It's something above coach, but I'm not sure that it was first class, so I just want to be completely accurate. It may have been choice seating rather than first class, but it was something very expensive.
And then we move forward, and now we've been doing this, I guess, for the better part of 2 years now from the first report that we did, and a little more than 2 years now since that first blanket request went out. But then we do stories that we following New Hanover County Commissioners to Pinehurst. And we look at that, but then we hear of some things that maybe commissioners in Columbus County are doing or other counties are doing to try to save some money. And then you look at whether you're having an impact, not just where you're looking, but others seeing what you're doing and saying, well, we better be better stewards as well, correct?
If I was in a public agency somewhere around here and I had seen what we're looking at, I would definitely double check what we were spending money on to make sure that I wasn't going to be the subject of the next report. I do know that in New Hanover County, for example, we have a report about to come out about their second quarter of this year's purchase card expenses. There's a difference in what they're spending. They're not catering as many meals. They're not... they're spending a lot less. Their second quarter P card expenses this year are $50,000 less than their second quarter P card expenses last year. And I'm not saying that we in any way take full credit for that or any credit necessarily, but the numbers have changed since we started doing these reports.
And at times when they're looking to cut and you know, you've got to say that at least in some way the difference is there. Our reports, the difference, you've got to at least draw some conclusion from that we have made a difference, at least a little bit.
Yes, and on the, just made me think of that, one of the reports that we did had to do with a new county policy that came out where they weren't allowed to use desk fans or space heaters anymore in an effort to do something about sustainability. Well, that came out about the same time they found out that their leadership was up in DC going to Ruth's Chris and Georgia Brown and spending hundreds of dollars per meal, and it was just the optics, like Justin said earlier. Right. I think the frontline county staffers didn't appreciate that they were being asked to save $4 a month by not using their desk fan, while the commissioners were arguably splurging with the same pool of money.
And I think, at least from my vantage point, this bled into some of our other coverage because during the 2014 campaign for New Hanover County Commission, we asked some of the candidates at one of our forums if they think the policy should be changed. Rob Zappel and Skip Watkins were both on that dais that day when I asked that question. They're both elected. They come back afterwards and we can then hold them a little more accountable to what they said on the campaign, at least to one specific issue.
Yes. And it's interesting because with that specific issue, the travel policy and whether the commissioners should have to stick to the same per diem as the county staff members, it looked as if Zappel specifically was wavering a little bit from what he said when he was running to what he said when he was actually in office. And that's still in flux. So I think at the end of the day, Zappel may vote that the county commissioners should stick to the same per diem as the rest of the staff. But it does contribute to accountability when we're asking these questions during the campaign as well.
To those of us who have been in this business for a while, at least when I first got into it, this to me was a lot about what journalism and reporting and news was about. I know it's morphed since A Current Affair and everything else like that, at least to my opinion it has. But does this really give you a sense, Justin, that you're doing journalism 101?
Sure. I mean, it always goes back to me about being a watchdog, whether it's looking at spending. I mean, I think that's the most basic thing we can do as journalists when we're looking at government reporting is, what are we spending the money on? And, and that bleeds over to all other things. It's just holding people accountable, whether that's with spending, whether that's with how law enforcement and lawmakers are using the power that, it wasn't given to them. They had to run for it, and they had to earn it. But that doesn't give anyone a blank check or carte blanche to do whatever they want to. I mean, I think it's the most basic thing we can do as journalists is just to keep an eye on them.
And one thing I really appreciated about working for WECT is WECT has provided the time for us to do this. It is not a day turn. A lot of reporters, they come in, they get their assignment that morning, they have the report on air that evening. This takes weeks, months, some time to do this, and a lot of days when I didn't have a report on the air at all because I was piling through, Excel documents or whatever. And Justin is also exceptionally good at Excel and has taught me a lot of Excel tricks, but it takes some time, it takes some techniques that you aren't necessarily going to use every day in journalism. But I think it's important, and like I said earlier, nobody's necessarily doing it if we don't.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the boss will like that shout out from you for giving
No,
giving him a pat on the back for allowing it. But this was a commitment we made 2 years ago that we were going to do this and do it the right way.
We wanted to set ourselves apart from some of the other outlets, in the area. Where can we really step aside? And we chose, investigative journalism because I didn't feel that anyone was doing it as well as they could have, including ourselves at the time. And like Ann said, there will be days that we'll end up being short-staffed on the air. The day that we're recording this is going to be one of those days, unfortunately. But it's important in the long run. I'd much rather have Ann, not reporting on TV today because she's working on 4 stories right now, and 3 or 4 stories that people are going to really remember and that are going to be important to what we're doing.
And we're using the spending as the crowbar here for this discussion, but it's bled into other things. We did a Freedom of Information request on something I noticed on DWI arrests and cases, and it turned into an investigative report that ended with an assistant district attorney being relieved of his duties, but once again, it was keeping an eye on the cases in Columbus County.
And not only that, but you just did a follow-up story too and what was the dismissal rate? It was
down dramatically, down to 16% from 46% in that county. And so, I think when you learn the good habits and when you make that commitment, it bleeds into several other things. You have done a lot of them, Ann, and to your credit, have done them better than anybody that I've seen do them on a local level. But it has bled into many of our other ways of reporting.
Sure, it's trying to change the mindset, especially with a lot of the younger journalists that come through here. Most of them are straight out of college. This is their first jobs in this industry. And if they see people like Ann or Justin Smith, the kind of stories that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, it's not just reporting a press release. It's not just going out and getting one interview. It's changing your mindset of how to go deeper into a story, how to find what's actually the driving force behind that random agenda item on the city council meeting. It's just really changing the way you look at every story every day.
And it's uncomfortable though too, Ann, like you mentioned before. It's not easy.
Well, you're calling people out publicly on something they did that people might not agree with, and so that is awkward. And I mean, luckily though, there are certainly exceptions, but I think most people respect the questions that we're asking is not maliciously driven or whatever, but we think these are things that need to be pointed out. And I think most people appreciate that that's our
That was certainly the response that I got when I brought up the instance that I found to the district attorney who had no idea it was going on at the time, saying you should be, thank you for pointing this out and changes will be made. So in the long run, even though you have to step up to somebody and you got to have that backbone to ask the question, in the end, it proves justified when changes are made, especially because of several of your reports.
Right. Well, we hope so, because they're not easy to do. They're kind of a pain in the neck, and you certainly feel like your mind might go absolutely numb after you've looked through the 400 pages of, P-card receipts. But we're finding interesting things, and we were happy to see in this latest quarter that we went through, we found less interesting things. We don't like to make things uncomfortable, or we're not looking to be troublemakers. We're just looking to point out things that everybody might benefit from if this changes.
And basically, it's taxpayer money. And if watchdog is the title we get, we can live with that and wear that proudly, at least in my mind.
Right.
All right, Ann McAdams, Justin West, thanks for being here for this backstory. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now, you can see many of the stories we talked about in today's interview by going to WECT Investigates on our website, WECT.com, and the WECT News mobile app. Thanks for joining us. I'm John Evans, and we're back soon with another backstory.